Future Influencers monthly webinar. I'm John Wilson. I am Head of Technical Research and Policy at Dalriada, and I'll be your chair for today, as well as one of your speakers. Just before we get on to the agenda for today, just a quick word about the platform that we're using for this webinar. You'll be able to hear me and my fellow speakers, but we can't hear you to keep background noise and disruption to a minimum, but that doesn't mean that you can't participate in the webinar, and indeed we hope you do. There is a Q&A or chat box, hopefully you can see on your screen. I think it's up in the top right hand corner, so anything you'd like to ask or just observations, please do add them to that chat box and we'll pick up on them as we go along, and maybe do a bit of a sweep up towards the end if there's anything that we have missed. Now, if we could move on to the next slide, I'll speak to the agenda now. If you could move on again, please, Kaz. Thank you. Yep. So a bit of a mixed bag today, and not all directly pension presentations, just for a bit of variety. I'm shortly going to hand over to my colleague, Dalriada Trustees, Adrian Campbell, who's going to speak a bit about some of the soft skills that trustees and pension practitioners may need in exercising their function. I'm going to take over after Adrian and speak for about 20 minutes just on latest developments around addressing GMP inequalities. I will look at forthcoming HMRC guidance, latest guidance to come from the industry, and just a word or two about some of the recent legal proceedings and when we might get further judicial guidance. And then, last but not least, I'm going to hand over to another colleague, Liam Vogel, who is going to look at communication tools. And as I mentioned before, please do take the opportunity to participate in the webinar. I'll keep an eye out for questions in the chat box as we go along, and I'll alert speakers as and when they arise. So on that note, I will hand over to you, Adrian.
Thank you, John. Good morning, all. For those who don't know me, I'm Adrian Campbell, and I am a professional trustee at Dalriada, and usually I work in our London office. But like most of us, I've now got quite used to working from home for the last 3.5 months, and I've had to get used to interacting virtually with my colleagues and external stakeholders. I'm sure that you would all agree that working from home full-time has its advantages and its disadvantages. I live on the south coast in Brighton, and I've been lucky enough to go for a swim in the sea this morning, which was great. Something I wouldn't have time for if I was commuting to London. Anyway, my presentation to you today is about soft skills. My colleagues and I have recently sat and thankfully passed the Pensions Management Institute Level 3 Certificate in Pension Trusteeship, and that exam was a soft skills exam. This relates to the accreditation regime for professional trustees, which was introduced on the 1st of July this year, and Dalriada Trustees now has 35 fully accredited professional trustees. We've all come to trusteeship from a variety of pension related professions, 35% of women, 65% of men, and the average age of our accredited trustees is 45. So, having passed the exam myself, the question I've been asked by quite a few external stakeholders that I work with is, what do soft skills actually mean? Up until recently, I could only provide a sort of relatively short answer on the lines of, well, soft skills are about how one comes across to everyone that you work with. So I decided to do some research, and this is a short presentation about my findings about what soft skills are and how we can use them every day at work or even outside of work. So what are soft skills? Soft skills can be defined as character traits or interpersonal aptitudes that affect your ability to work and interact with others. They are natural abilities that usually can't be taught in a classroom or managed quantitatively. They are often, but not always, people skills. Next slide, please, Kaz. So what's the difference between hard skills and soft skills? Soft skills relate more to emotional intelligence and are natural abilities that help us interact well with others. They are usually across all industries and job types. Hard skills, on the other hand, are usually job-specific skills that are learned through education or training. Next slide, please, Kaz. So, why are soft skills so important? Well, soft skills are an essential part of finding, attracting, and retaining clients. Highly developed presentation skills, networking abilities, and etiquette awareness can help you win new clients and gain more work from existing clients. I picked out some key examples of soft skills, which is on the next slide. And as you can see, there's quite a range of different skills relating to soft skills, and I've picked out what I think are some particularly relevant ones for those that work in trusteeship or in pensions in general. As soft skills become more important, it's good to know that although you can't sit down in a classroom and learn them, you can hone and develop these talents. As with any skill, practice makes perfect. So the examples I've picked are communication. Communication skills can be oral or written and allow you to express yourself effectively in the workplace. Some examples of this are clarity. How would you go about explaining something to someone or an audience so that they can easily understand it? Another example would be confidence. If you display confidence in what you are talking about, this will enable the person or people that you know your stuff, and they will gain confidence in you. An important one here is respect. Treating people with respect will help you. Sometimes when the going gets tough, we forget this, and our communications could appear somewhat aggressive, which could upset the person or audience you are communicating with. If one remembers to always treat others with respect, they are more than likely to achieve results. Listening. It's also important that you listen to what someone has to say, and also that you clarify what has been said to check your understanding. And one final example under communication is friendliness. One should always appear to be friendly whoever you deal with, as it helps in maintaining relationships. The next example I'm going to talk to you about is teamwork. Teamwork skills allow you to operate well in a group setting in the workplace to quickly and effectively accomplish tasks. Some examples of this are having solid communication skills to make sure that it's the foundation of strong teamwork. Delegation, make sure that all of the team you're working with assist you with the task at hand, and making sure that they fully understand what is expected of them and the timeframes involved. Make sure that you're a good listener, allowing all the team to have their say and provide their views, and allowing an idea exchange. Mediation, ensure that you sort out as quickly as possible any issues within the team, but obviously in a respectful way. I'm moving on to my next example here of adaptability. Adaptability and flexibility are related skills and are about embracing and rolling with change. You can go about this by being curious, asking questions to check your understanding, being a decisive decision maker, make sure you reach a consensus as much as possible with your team, remaining calm. Present yourself as being calm, as this will help your colleagues and your team remain calm. Show optimism. Show optimism that you're optimistic about the change or outcome, even if sometimes things are not going quite to plan. And be open-minded. Be prepared to hear the views of others at all times. The next one I picked was problem solving. Problem solving abilities are a blend of using an analytical and creative thinking to find solutions. So for this, you need some lateral thinking, thinking about the problem and what are the solutions or alternatives to resolve the problem. Logical reasoning, ensuring that the decisions that are taken are realistic. Be persistent, making sure you put every effort into resolving a problem, even when sometimes the going gets tough. And negotiation, be prepared to negotiate to reach a compromise when required. The final example I had was work ethic. Work ethic is a soft skill that provides your belief in the importance of work and its ability to strengthen your character. Demonstrating work ethic should be important in every career, but it's vital that we apply these at all times. Some examples of this are obviously integrity, always making sure that you act with integrity at all times and take responsibility for your own actions. Apply some discipline, make sure you focus on the task at hand and try to deliver projects within agreed timescales. If you can't communicate openly about why you have not been able to, set a revised realistic time frame for completion. Actually, there was one more, interpersonal skills. These are skills that you need to use constantly as you interact to communicate with your colleagues and external stakeholders. Some examples of interpersonal skills would be humour. It sometimes helps if you can add some humour in when you're dealing with people, especially when dealing with pensions, because this can be somewhat dry at times. Have some patience, have a realisation that people are different and might not always work at the same pace as you. Be tolerant, be prepared to accept that not everything will go the way you expect it to at all times. And be diplomatic. When faced with challenging interactions with others, try to be as diplomatic as possible. Next slide, please, Kaz. So, why do we need soft skills? They are fundamental to achieving in the role that you have now and essential for career progression. Soft skills are sometimes more important than hard skills in your roles. Next slide, please. So what are the key skills of a professional trustee? Trustees need to be organised, trustworthy, acting at all times with honesty and integrity. They need the ability to think independently, such that they are not easily influenced by others, as they listen to alternative options, after which they can make up their own mind how to best exercise judgment. For me, I discovered that the soft skill exam that I recently took tested all of this and more. It dealt with the many scenarios that may arise in the role of a pension scheme trustee. It considered the challenges around good governance, managing conflicts of interest, and the need for training and improving knowledge. The test also included the ability to lead and manage advisors, service providers, as well as others. From my own perspective, as a trustee, my primary role is to act in the best interest of all the members and show transparency in how I behave in the role. This creates trust and illustrates that I understand that my real boss are the members. For me, one of the main benefits of taking the soft skills test was that it made me take a step back and reflect. It reminded me that trustee boards need to be trained in complex decision making, often under stressful conditions, and that after even taking expert third-party advice, the decision always remains that of the trustee. I see soft skills is an essential part of my ongoing training. Some of the soft skill scenarios detailed in the exam require deep thought and illustrate that sometimes there are no perfect answers, particularly when managing conflicting priorities. So I will continue to develop my soft skills and would recommend to all of you that you should too, as it will help you advance in your careers. Thank you. That was the end of my presentation.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. And at the moment, you're getting off lightly. I don't see any questions posted to the Q&A box, but please feel free to do so at any time. As I say, I'll pick them up later, and certainly would like to hear your own observations as well about the application of soft skills in the work that we all do. But I think it is now over to me now to do something completely different and provide a bit of an update on the ongoing GMP equalisation saga. Now I'm sure, as all attendees on this webinar know, there is no such thing as too much GMP equalisation. So for my sins, I sit on the industry working group, which is the group that helps with the production of the HMRC guidance, including the newsletter that was issued in February this year. And I am also on one of the PASA, Pensions Administration Standard Authorities subcommittee, the subcommittee looking at tax and GMP equalisation. So I'll say a little bit about both of them, and if we could move on to the next slide, please, Cass. Yeah, so I'll start with the HMRC guidance. So we have had what HMRC call the Tranche 1 guidance, which I mentioned was issued in February, I think on the 20th of February. And you know, it I think provided some helpful pointers, at least in terms of equalisation methods that did not entail conversion of GMP into scheme benefits. What I am expecting to see in the Tranche 2 guidance, which should hopefully be issued any day now, there was a slight delay. HMRC hoped to have it issued at the beginning of July, but it may even appear this week. And I think that it will contain a lot more detail around things like lump sums. So that would include trivial lump sums on retirement and death, small lump sums, pension commencement lump sums, and lump sum death benefits. And how HMRC view them, and in particular what the options are for schemes affected by GMP equalisation, where they have already paid out a lump sum, but they are now contemplating paying a further lump sum because the original lump sum was a little less than it should have been because it did not take into account GMP inequalities. If you're looking for a lot more detail around conversion of GMPs, that is method D2 for dealing with GMP equalisation, my expectation is that HMRC is probably not going to say too much. Where I believe we have got to on this, and this is not just through conversations with the HMRC working group, but also with working with PASA and other trade bodies, is that resolution of all the issues that can arise for some members with conversion, in particular the creation of pension inputs for annual allowance for deferred members who are otherwise exempt from the annual allowance, and perhaps even more important for those affected, the possible loss of HMRC protections, and in particular fixed protections. All of this will not be resolved unless there is some amending legislation to the Finance Act 2004 and its attendant regulations. I do not think that all the challenges can be resolved through interpretation of the Pensions Tax Manual alone, although I'm sure as practitioners everyone realises that there are some workaround to the challenges with conversion. So where I think we're at in terms of the HMRC working group and anything further on conversion is that the wider issues have now been put onto the radar of both the Department for Work and Pensions and probably more importantly HM Treasury in terms of finding a solution beyond just interpretation of the existing HMRC guidance and the existing registered pension scheme legislation. So look out for that guidance. As I say, it could easily appear as early as today or later on this week. And possibly even before it, and in fact some of the guidance came out yesterday. There is the information for the industry coming out from the PASA subcommittees on GMP equalisation. That's the equalisation working group. I mentioned already that I am on the tax subcommittee. We are ready to go live with our industry guidance on tax issues arising from GMP equalisation. We just want to see the Tranche 2 guidance from HMRC to, of course, ensure consistency with that before we publish our guidance. But there will be a lot in that, supplementing the existing HMRC newsletter, going into some detail around conversion, the problems that arise and some of the solutions that might be viewed as workarounds for them, and covering other issues as well, such as payment of arrears and interest on arrears, and the last iteration that I saw of the tax guidance included a helpful schedule as well for when payment of arrears straddle many tax years. And members might be looking for a breakdown of their arrears payment to make sure that they pay the appropriate tax on their GMP equalisation uplift. On data, hopefully everybody saw the publication that came out from PASA yesterday around data and GMP equalisation. It also touched around data on GMP reconciliation and rectification and the interplay between rectification and equalisation. But a lot, I hope everyone agrees, of useful material in that publication in terms of the data that pension schemes ideally need for GMP equalisation, which is very, very comprehensive and contained in an appendix in the data guidance, and the data that pension schemes might be able to get away with, and some of the pragmatic assumptions that might be used, where the data that you have, which I think will be the case in most projects, is not always optimum or ideal. That guidance is certainly worth, I think, a read. It's quite technical. It's aimed at practitioners, but it's something that I think practitioners should take on board, because I'm absolutely sure it has practical application and utility for GMP equalisation projects when they kick off. And I will come back to that issue of timing of projects in the next slide. Again, I expect most people are aware, but recently there was a third hearing in the Lloyds Banking Group GMP equalisation case, although I think a lot of the parties think of the hearing that happened this year actually as the second hearing, because the two hearings that occurred in 2018 were really, I think, viewed as regards Lloyds Bank and the trustees as almost a composite set of proceedings. But the most recent hearing is looking at past transfers in particular, but with submissions that I think are wide enough to provide guidance to us in the industry on not just past transfers, but other full settlement cases as well. So I think it will be relevant to things like where members' benefits have been commuted on triviality, and possibly even issues around payments of lump sum death benefits, where it is actually conceivable that GMP equalisation can impact and there could be an uplift due. Now, the hearing itself, I think, took place over 7 days, and it was done virtually via Skype. I managed to last the first 2 days. That was about the extent of my stamina, but it was enough for me to listen into the initial submissions by the various parties, and they were very wide-ranging. There were arguments that where there have been transfers out, which did not include an uplift for GMP equalisation, then the transferring scheme should be liable for any top-up. There were alternative arguments saying the receiving scheme should be liable for the top-up, but only where the receiving scheme is a defined benefit pension scheme. And there was arguments that the receiving scheme should be liable for the GMP equalisation uplift, and it does not matter whether or not the receiving scheme is a defined benefit scheme or a defined contribution scheme. And moreover, there was a submission made that liability should rest with the receiving scheme, even in the case of a contract-based pension scheme like a group personal pension. And some of these submissions went as far to say that liability should rest with the receiving scheme for non-equalised transfers out, even where the employer in the receiving scheme had no connection to the transferring scheme. So we're, it is a completely separate and non-associated employer that a transfer has been made to. Going on beyond that, there was also submissions that there could be joint liability, and that liability could depend on whether transfers were part of a bulk transfer exercise or individual transfers at members' request. So it will be really, really interesting just to see what the judge in that case, Lord Justice Paul Morgan, makes of all of this and what his ultimate conclusions are when the judgment is published. One thing I did detect in the initial submissions is that Lord Justice Morgan was finding it very, very difficult to see how a transfer could be made without taking into account GMP equalisation, and the transferring scheme could not have any liability for the top-up at all. There were several interruptions to submissions where he asked for clarification as to how council thought it was possible that where a transfer was paid out and it was less than it should have been because of GMP equalisation, how could the transferring scheme not have any liability for topping that up? And in response to that, counsel for the bank, in particular, but put I think a lot of stock into the Colorall judgment, but councils, particularly those representing members, put on a very different interpretation of what was said in the Colorall judgment of now almost well over 20 years ago. In terms of when we're going to get more information, it probably will not be too long. We're not expecting the judgment to take months to be published, and I have had the benefit of speaking to one or two of the parties involved in the case, and it was indicated to me that those involved with the case are actually hopeful that they may see a draft of the judgment in advance of its public publication before the end of July. And when that does go public, the intention is for HMRC to then issue a further tranche of guidance as a pension scheme's newsletter. That would be on top of the tranche 2 guidance on lump sums that I expect to see this month. The tranche 3 guidance will follow on from the third hearing in the Lloyds Banking Group case. Will obviously cover past transfers, but one aspect of it that I'm a bit more intrigued to see, and there was a discussion about this in the first couple of days of the most recent Lloyds Bank Group hearing, is the possibility that where there are just small amounts to be paid by way of GMP equalisation uplifts, a possibility, rather than topping up the transfer payment or paying a further scheme pension from either the transferring or the receiving scheme, would just be to make a cash payment direct to the members involved. That is those who are entitled to a GMP uplift. Seemingly HMRC have been involved in these discussions, and I gather that the discussions have been quite positive in terms of being able to discharge the GMP equalisation liability by a one-off cash payment, which would obviously, I think, be good news all around in terms of both the pension schemes involved and the members affected. Kaz, if we could move on to the next slide, please. So, where does that leave us all now? And maybe in particular, what should we be thinking about as either pension scheme trustees or pension practitioners, be it lawyers, administrators, or other professional services providers? Well, to my mind, I find it very difficult to see the justification for not paying equalised transfer values for anybody asking for a transfer value now, or essentially post the original Lloyds Bank Group hearing in October 2018. I know a lot of schemes in 2019 did start paying equalised transfer values, effectively using the equalisation method C2 as a bit of a proxy, but there's still a lot of schemes that have not done anything about transfers. And I do find that quite difficult to rationalise, and would certainly welcome the views of anyone who's dialed in for this webinar. In particular, I don't think that a decision to pay equalised transfer values impinges on any longer term decision that might be made as to the wider GMP equalisation project. And what I mean by that is you might use something like method C2 as a proxy for paying equalised transfer values, but later on you might want to do something different when you actually decide to do GMP equalisation across the board for your scheme members who are affected. I don't think the decision on transfers would impact on that. So that's future transfers. On past transfers, I absolutely accept that we should all wait on the judgment from the third Lloyds Banking Group hearing to get that judicial guidance as to what, if anything, we might need to do next. And the good thing, I think, about making a decision on equalising transfer values is that many pension schemes use the transfer value basis for lump sums as well. So, for example, trivial and commutation lump sums are made on a TV basis, as are serious ill health lump sums quite often as well. So that's another aspect of mitigation in terms of duty to equalise benefits for GMP that would be addressed by equalising transfer values. I put on there past and future lump sums, and the reason that I wanted to raise that is I think there is a possibility from the discussions that I've had with various stakeholders that the tranche 2 guidance from HMRC that I have mentioned might say that the application of the pensions tax manual and the registered pension scheme rules will differ depending on past or future lump sums. And what I mean by that is where a unequalised payment has already been made and the trustees are now looking at paying a top up for GMP equalisation, the options for that top up in terms of making sure it's an authorised payment could depend on whether the original payment was made before October 2018, the date of the original GMP equalisation ruling, or after or shortly after the Lloyds Bank hearing in October 2018. Any decisions that trustees may have already made around the method that they're going to use for GMP equalisation could also impact the prospective tax treatment of GMP equalisation uplifts. So do look out for that. And for me, as I say, I think it just reinforces the importance of trying to make as many future payments on an equalised basis as is practically possible. Just a few final thoughts then. I am conscious of the time. Now, I've mentioned already that the PASA subcommittee on pension scheme data has issued its guidance only the other day. One other point that I would maybe highlight in that is that, you know, pension schemes should already be starting to think about how they are going to address the GMP inequality issue. You know, we are now not far from 2 years away, 2 years from when the original hearing took place. You know, so for how long can this issue go unaddressed until you reach a point where, for example, not addressing it becomes maladministration? And one of the points in the data guidance that was issued by PASA yesterday is that now the pieces of the jigsaw are starting to come together a little bit, we might see a spike in demand for projects to begin. So for people who are still at the position that they don't want to go first, if they are waiting for other schemes to see what they do, then when they do eventually get round to commissioning their advisors to start work on GMP equalisation, they could very easily find themselves at the back of quite a long queue, because there is finite amount of resource in the industry to conduct these exercises. So something to keep in mind for those that are still hesitant about beginning a GMP equalisation project. I mentioned there about some schemes might be waiting to see what others are doing, unless their hand is forced, because maybe they're doing a buyout. But GMP equalisation projects are now underway. The Lloyds Bank has commenced its GMP equalisation project. It is going to use equalisation method B for GMP equalisation. The decision to do that was based on the number of people that they have affected, which runs into many thousands. So these projects are underway. I think that most of the information that we're going to get is already out there, and the rest of it's on its way. So I certainly think it's worth making sure that schemes have their advisors and administrators teed up to get things moving in a timely way. And what they don't find is that they want to start this year, but their professional service providers tell them that they can't help them until next year because of resource issues as a result of everybody wanting to go at once. And just a final word there around available guidance. The Pensions Lifetime Savings Association recently published a made simple guide to GMP equalisation, which I thought was quite useful and certainly would be helpful in discussions with trustee boards in terms of understanding the various issues and the workarounds, and possibly even when it comes to communicating with pension scheme members. So a roundup then of where I think we're at with GMP equalisation and what I think pension schemes should be doing. And I am conscious of the fact that there's a couple of questions there, but I'm also due to hand over to my colleague Liam for the last talk at 10:40 today. So Liam, I will let you go first, and then I will pick up on the observations at the end. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for that, John. Yeah, just a brief introduction to myself. My name's Liam Bogle, and I've worked at Dalriada for just over 3 years now, based primarily in our Manchester office. And as Adrian said, COVID-19 restrictions have probably had the benefits for me, because I'm based, as you can tell from my accent, from out of Liverpool, so it's avoided the commute. However, probably to counteract that, I've got 2 young children, so it's not all sweetness and light working from home. It has had its issues, but I think that leads on nicely to my topic really. COVID-19 has caused all sorts of pension schemes and industry to think about how they are working and different ways they need to work in the future. And obviously pension schemes are no different, and my presentation will hopefully just cover one of the ways in which trustee boards may improve the communication going forward. But Kaz, if you want to move on to the next slide, I will probably just go through some of the issues that are driving the need to change to the traditional board model and structure. So first of all, obviously, as I've just stated, we've got the COVID-19 pandemic, which, even though it's been a bit of a nightmare for some companies and some industries, I think our industry personally has adapted and moved with the changes quite quickly and smoothly. We've had regular meetings, regular trustee meetings that have sort of moved forward pretty seamlessly and without issues. So I think even though the COVID-19 pandemic has brought this communication issue forward, I think the likes of Teams and Zoom have obviously assisted in maintaining the workings of a trustee board and maintaining the processes that we need to go through. Obviously, in terms of just personally, I think we've all probably experienced team catch-ups, coffees over Teams or Zoom, regular family or team quizzes at the weekend have become the norm, and personally starting to become a bit of a tedious thing every Saturday for my family quiz. I think I'm gonna dip out to the next one. However, I think that the lack of certainty about this virus and the threat that it poses long term will mean the way we are working at the moment is probably going to be the way forward for the foreseeable. A lot of trustee boards, for example, are made up of the older members of the community, pensioner trustees, for example, lifelong trustees, and therefore the threat of a face-to-face meeting is even more prevalent for those members of the board. So I think until a vaccine or medicine is found, this sort of virtual reality world that we're in now will be the future. Another issue or item that has led for a drive to change has been obviously the regulators' focus on the 21st Century Trusteeship Paper. The expectations of the regulator for trustee boards to implement some of the points that I'm going to go through in a minute to aid good decision making has been obviously a lot more prevalent, and there's a lot more focus on it now. So in terms of setting clear roles and responsibilities, clear strategic objectives for the pension scheme, a focus on a skilled and engaged and diverse board led by an effective chair. Now, I think we've all probably in the industry experienced a problem due to the lack of engagement from scheme members. For example, if we're going through an MNT process, very rarely do you get more than a couple of nominations at best, if not no nominations. There's also the occasion where employers may end up forcing the hand of employees to become an employer nominated trustee board, which, if that is the case, can lead to a lack of engagement from that trustee or from that trustee. Obviously, if the mind or the heart's not in the right place, it doesn't lead to focused engagement. There's also a part of the 21st Century Trusteeship guidelines, a need for close relationship with employers, advisors, and others involving the running of the scheme. Now, I think the traditional board meeting format of quarterly doesn't really aid this point, so developing the close relationships can be difficult. And also there's a key focus on a robust risk management framework focused on the key scheme risks. Now, obviously, items like risk registers are monitored and actioned at the trustee meetings, but I think there's a need for that to continue throughout the whole year rather than just at those quarterly or annual meetings. Next point, we've got the professional trustee accreditation process, which Adrian spoke through before, and obviously Dalriada I've got 35 trustees who have passed this accreditation process, with hopefully a couple more to follow in the next few months. Now, some of the examples Adrian set out in terms of the focus on trustee soft skills has led to a thought process on how we can improve trustee board communication and teamwork. Obviously, I think they were two of the key points that Adrian highlighted as key soft skills amongst the trustee board and for trustees. The improvement in IT communications. Now, I think that this is obviously being highlighted and brought to the fore by the lockdown and the need to work from home, but the ability for us all to work remotely and the software that is available has obviously improved dramatically, and I think we've all hopefully now got to grips with the different systems we may be using. Dalriada use Teams, and Spence use Teams. We use Teams, but I think obviously some companies are using Zoom, and I think everyone's now got to grips with it. The sold trusteeship model. Now, obviously, Dalriada, we've got a number of sole trustee appointments, but I think this is going to become more popular, obviously due to the increased focus by the regulator on pension schemes and also the lack of engagement for members who wish to be on the trustee board. So the sole trustee model can be a solution to a number of these problems. And as I've highlighted before, the last point, disengaged trustee board, a lack of engagement by certain members of the trustee board can potentially delay key decision-making processes. I think personally I've experienced this in the past where you can send emails to the trustees, and obviously some trustees are not as prompt as others on responding to certain requests, so it can result in undue delays. The regulator now expects trustees to be engaged, and they need to be able to bring certain skill sets to the table. We need to evidence completed training, for example. TPR toolkit needs to be completed by trustees and up to date and maintained. So I think there's a number of issues and items there on that list that probably drive, as you can see, are driving the need for some change in the way we communicate. Kaz, if you would move on to the next slide. I think this just talks through the usual traditional trustee meeting format, really. We've got the quarterly meeting cycle, which is probably prevalent on majority of schemes that I'm involved in, and I'm sure people listening have got the same format. It's a long established practice. However, I think on a number of smaller schemes, it's quarterly meeting doesn't happen. It's probably biannually or even annually. So it also suits the traditional non-executive role where they work in whole day blocks. So they would obviously traditionally prefer the usual day-long meeting. Another point, create a good record of the decision making via the minute taking process. Now, normally there'll be the secretary will take minutes, probably laboriously. I've experienced myself, not always an enjoyable experience, but it's normally create a very good record of the decisions, the discussions, and the actions due to be taken. I think the next point is definitely a key for the traditional trustee meeting model, the power in face-to-face communication. There's nothing is probably ever going to replace the face-to-face benefits of communication. For example, if chair of the trustee board would be able to have a look around the room and gauge whether or not a point is understood by all of the trustees. That's probably not as easy via email or even via this medium. An advisor as well. Advisors are also invited to the trustee meetings. Normally could spend time speaking to the trustees away from the actual board meeting with a coffee break or a lunch break, which just aids that development of key relationship as set out in my regulator point earlier. But there is drawbacks of this traditional trustee model, which I will move on to next. Kaz, if you wouldn't mind clicking to the next slide. Yeah, thanks. well, some of the drawbacks, I'm sure we've all got our own opinions on the drawbacks of the traditional meeting model, but I'm just trying to outline some of the points. We've got the stop-start process, which is driven by the quarterly meeting cycle, as I discussed earlier. We've all probably experienced a push of activity the couple of weeks leading up to a meeting and a couple of weeks after, but sometimes there can be a chasm and a gap of activity in between those meeting cycles. Now, that's not just from advisors, that will be from, as we said before, from those trustees who are not as engaged. They might engage prior to the meeting and after the meeting, but struggle to get anything from them in the intervening period. Issues not dealt with promptly. For example, quarterly investment reports, unless the meeting cycle is synced in with the quarterly investment reporting period, there's quite often the investment report 3 months or a quarter out of date by the time it comes around to the trustee meeting, which renders them really, especially in this COVID-19 world, null and void. So there's a need to try and deal with the issues a bit more promptly and not wait for a quarterly meeting. We need to improve the communication in the intervening periods. And that again leads on to the next point. Doesn't reflect the reality of a well-run scheme with continuous activity. Now I'm speaking from example. From experience, that the workings of a scheme are normally a daily grind in terms of the emails on a certain scheme, especially the larger schemes. It's a continuous and daily job to keep on top of these matters, and I think some of the larger schemes who maybe do not have a professional trustee will suffer because of the lack of engagement prior and after meetings. Next point, the board packs. I'm sure we've all definitely experienced a 100-odd page board pack that we receive, probably only partly read, not just from advisors but by trustees. It's impossible for a trustee really to receive a pack of that level and to be able to read through it in depth prior to the meeting. So it is a difficult barrier to overcome, and not just that. From a personal point of view, producing the board packs can be cumbersome and time consuming. So I think there's a need to try and improve that process. The real life dialogue by email and instant messenger that I referred to earlier in terms of a daily and weekly occurrence is not captured and stored effectively. It's relying on individuals to save relevant emails down to storage devices. It's a process that's open for error and sort of for stuff to be missed and decisions to maybe not recorded as accurate as what they could be. I think we've covered that doesn't reflect the need of an always-on professional trustee. For example, like Dalriada and others, the quarterly traditional meeting process just doesn't fit with this model as well as what we need to sort of implement in the future. There needs to be a greater communication on an ongoing basis. There is going to be, as indicated earlier, a reluctance of trustees to attend face-to-face meetings due to a number of personal circumstances, but I think that's going to be for the foreseeable. Again, highlighted earlier, meetings are laboriously recorded via minutes. I am speaking from experience of this. It can be a laborious task, and my wrist hasn't thanked me for it on many occasions, especially at the longer 6 or 7 hour trustee meetings, which results in an expensive outlay to take the minutes at the meeting, you've got to bring along sometimes an additional member of staff. You've then got to write up the minutes. It's an expensive, and it does add to the ongoing scheme cost. Travelling time is unproductive. We've all definitely experienced this, and I think we've all probably benefited from the improvements of working from home. Loss of unproductive travel time based on poor internet, poor network coverage on whatever mode of transport you be. If you drive, you've got no chance of doing any work on the way down to meetings. So I think that is traditionally a major drawback for us all. Kaz, can you move on to the next slide? I think it's not worth focusing on this too much, because I think it really is just a continuation of some of the issues. Finding files, for example, if there's a number of different advisors, some of the files can be held on historic storage devices which aren't easy to navigate through. It can be time consuming, and it can be held by a number of different parties. So I think there is obviously issues with, I think we've all probably experienced, again, finding certain files that we need. It can take up a lot of time. Board packs have been mentioned. The lack of recording of all email conversations, again, has been mentioned. And I think the board model and majority of trustees who have been involved in any of these meetings since lockdown have probably noticed the benefits of Teams and the benefits of communicating via Teams. I think the next picture we've covered in terms of the COVID unknowns and the agility we'll all need to show and require going forward. So I'll move on to the next slide, please, Kaz. So what will the future look like? Now, due to all the factors I've listed, we at Dalriada believe there's a need and a requirement, and also a window for improvement on how the trustee board and advisors can communicate. There needs to be an increase in collaboration between trustees on the board themselves and with advisors, and also there's an increase due to the regulator requirements to improve scheme governance, and that's why at Dalriada we're piloting currently what's called the trusteeship, and this is a trusteeship tool or governance tool that is managed via Teams or runs via Teams, and this will allow trustees to collaborate with advisors in developing agendas. So, for example, if Dalriada created a draft agenda, we could allow access to this Teams channel for certain advisors, and we could interact via Teams rather than the usual email trail that evolves. The instant messenger type facility will hopefully aid communication. We will also on there be able to have a tab which stores key scheme documents. So as it states there, you've got key deed and scheme deed and rules, trust deed and rules, sorry, key deeds of amendments. You've got the chair statements, investment reports, any key document that you can list. There's many that are not listed on here that could be stored in an easy accessible tab to speed up the process, not just for advisors but also for trustee board members. If there's any key decisions, they're able to access any relevant key scheme documents to allow them to have that information to be able to make that decision a bit more easily than it is at the moment. The assembly and distribution of agendas and board packs. So there will be a trustee meeting tab which will allow additional tabs for agendas to be uploaded and board packs to be uploaded. So it takes away the need for email email conversations to take place. It allows board packs to be uploaded rather than emailed via a secure site, or a lot of the board packs still probably at times have been mailed out. So it improves that process. The board packs can just be uploaded and accessed via Teams. It will allow the management and tracking of key scheme tasks, so tasks on the back of meetings, whereas sometimes the actions can be, as we've stated before, they can be left up until close to the meeting point, the next meeting date, the quarterly meeting date. We can manage and track tasks. Trustee boards and other trustees can view and see the progress of the task. So, for example, if they got a professional trustee on board, they can see what's been going on in the interim time. They're not always copied in onto all email communications, but the updating of these management and tasks and actions will allow them to be able to see the progress that's being made. Obviously, the key selling point of this, because I know there is other trustee board tools and out there, is the online meeting access via the Teams channel that will be created. So it will be one sort of fits all channel for that pension scheme. So we can obviously trustees or advisors will be able to easily access the agenda and meeting packs while on the call. I've covered the next point really, managing meeting follow-up. It will just allow actions to be covered and probably be discussed easier. The dedicated channel, which we've just covered there with administrator, will also be available. So if you, for example, if there's trustee discretions or member issue cases that needed to be discussed, rather than the usual send an email out and get a response by individual trustees in piecemeal, there will be a dedicated channel. So it should hopefully be easier for these decisions to be moved forward. The advantage as well with Teams, and I don't know if anyone's working with Teams, is you do get notifications. So there will be a prompt for trustees, that notification. We all know how much we all communicate via our phones now, that it will improve probably the uptake on some of the key member decisions that may get missed via email. Structured communication, it allows structured communication between trustees and advisors on topics between the meetings, like we discussed. So it's a bit like the WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger tools that we all use. I think we all find it a lot easier to communicate via this medium than typing out an email, sending it off. I think the communication on the likes of WhatsApp, and even though it could have its drawbacks, will hopefully increase engagement and put regulator emphasis on increased engagement for trustees will hopefully improve that matter. We will be able to control access for advisors, so advisors will be allowed access to certain documents, for example, or the agenda, different parts of the trust discussions that are taking place. Advisors can be given access. And the key advantage is there's a full audit trail, so that audit trail is already there. You haven't got to, as we discussed earlier, some of the key emails, or it's down to that individual user to make sure that email is saved. This will allow an audit trail to automatically be recorded. And there's also, I'm not sure if people are aware and have viewed our Mantle system before, there's a possibility that this will be able to be integrated with our Mantle tool, so trustees will be able to access live, up-to-date funding information via this team channel and via Teams. So it will avoid the need for logging on to X amount of different providers to get this information. It'll be in one place for trustees to be able to access all the information they require. Kaz, if you want to move on to the next slide. Thank you. Now, this is just some of the issues that we've probably need to cover because of the development of this tool. We just need to ensure that the scheme rules and the decision-making rules allow the decisions to be made via this medium. Obviously, it's the traditional method of trustees all getting together, making the decision. It's recorded in the minutes, and so on. We just need to ensure that a governance document is established to ensure the discussions and the decisions taking place via Teams or via e-trusteeship is a viable one. As we've highlighted before, the meetings can include audio and video participants and they will be recorded unless it's not desired. So that would potentially remove the additional costs of the secretary taking notes verbatim and trying to decipher those notes after the meeting. You know, if there's an actual recording and transcript, that takes away the need for that in the minutes, and that process can hopefully be sped up and the cost reduced. It also allows, in the eventuality of COVID-19 relaxations of social distancing measures, for this to be brought into a meeting. So, for example, if a number of trustees did not or could not attend the face-to-face meeting, we could link them in via this tool into that meeting, and all the information will be easily accessible for them via that mode. There's also a development for this to be integrated with other platforms. So even though we're using the Teams and we're going down the Teams route, advisors that use Zoom, Google Meet, Cisco, WebEx, etc., will be able to access this tool as well. So hopefully there won't be the issues of trustees or individuals and advisors working on different platforms and user error falling down in that respect. So, as I say, at this stage, this is being piloted by Dalriada and will hopefully be rolled out over a 3 to 6 month period on a number of schemes. It will obviously depend on agreement and sign off by trustees and the review of the decision making and rules processes. And I'm sure there'll probably be other players in the market with similar offerings, but we want to be early adopters in this, and we see this as a vital way to improve scheme governance and standards. And personally, I think it will be a major improvement on the way we work as a trustee board if we can roll this out on our schemes. And that's all from me. Thank you for listening, and please let me know if you've got any questions, or alternatively, if anyone's got any other experience of board communication tools that they're using or they've had experience of. I'd be delighted to hear from them. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Liam. And there is a question for you, which I'll come to, but I'll do them in order now, because there was a few posted during my session as well. So the first question or observation, I suppose, was, as an important precursor to equalisation, many schemes are performing reconciliation and rectification work currently. HMRC are in the process of issuing their final data cuts in respect of their reconciliation positions for each scheme. However, we are seeing this raise many questions around new liabilities and discrepancies between that data and that from the online GMP checker. To what extent do you think schemes should use the final data cuts to conclude their reconciliation work, and do you think some industry guidance on this process would be beneficial? Well, I think this was something that was touched on in the PASA data guidance that has been published this week, and I did just try to do a quick search while Liam was doing his presentation, and the hit that I got says this. So on the HMRC data and GMP online checker, HMRC has acknowledged there can be issues for schemes hoping to complete GMP projects due to the fact that the online GMP checker calculates GMPs at the time of request, whereas the final GMP data cut supplied by HMRC is at a fixed point in time. This means there are 3 data sets to reference: scheme data, HMRC data, and GMP checker data. This needs to be factored into the data collection process, and this will also impact on how schemes are dealing with GMP reconciliation and rectification. So there is some industry guidance on that. I suspect there's probably a bit more in the PASA guidance on reconciliation and rectification. But what the PASA data guidance does says that the approach suggested in that observation is just one of a number of approaches that could be taken. So it's worth having a look at the guidance and then deciding what approach would be optimum for the scheme that you are involved in. Another question also on GMP equalisation. What consideration, if any, has been given to the practicalities of tracking down transferring schemes in order to get the top-up payments? Historic transfer-in records are quite possibly missing and incomplete. In addition, what about whether the transferring scheme no longer exists? Well, all I can really say on that at this stage is that the initial submissions, and I'm sure the subsequent arguments in the most recent LBG hearing, did cover all these practical challenges and hurdles. So I hope to see something about that in the final judgment when it is published. I mean, just as a slight digression, the submissions in the most recent hearing were very, very comprehensive. And I think one of the things that we will get out of this most recent case is perhaps the most comprehensive judicial analysis that we've ever had on the transfer value provisions in the Pension Schemes Act 1993 and the transfer value regulations, covering all kinds of aspects from members' applications to when discharges would be complete and incomplete. So the judge in the case, Lord Justice Morgan, was well aware of the practicalities, and I do hope he'll take them on board when the ruling gets published, hopefully sometime early in August. And just a final question for me before I pass one to Liam. We have had legal advice which suggests that the current method for transfers out should be consistent with the approach taken later, and if there does end up being a difference, then top-up payments may still be needed. Yep, I acknowledge that. I have seen such advice as well. I've also seen contrary advice, and perhaps the best comment I can make is based on my own experience in that before I joined Dalriada, I was working at JLT prior to its takeover by Mercer, and in early 2019, JLT wrote out to all clients that it provides third-party admin services for, that's hundreds of schemes, saying that unless told otherwise, that from April and May, they would be paying equalised transfer values for all subsequent transfer value requests. We did say that approach would be implemented unless trustees instructed us otherwise, but trustees should get legal advice first. The upshot of all of that is nearly every single pension scheme accepted the decision to start paying equalised transfer values. Nearly all of the legal advice was supportive of our approach, and the majority of the legal advice was to the effect that using one approach as an interim solution for transfer values and lump sums back in April, May 2019 would not bind the scheme to using the same approach when conducting a full GMP equalisation project at a later date. So that has been my own experience, but I have seen legal advice entirely consistent with that observed in the question. I'm going to pass to you now, Liam. We have a question here. Can you see value in moving to a streamlined online model for trusteeship? Do you envisage continued need for minutes, or do you foresee a move to video recording of meetings with task action driven logs coming out of meetings, or do you envisage still a need for some detailed minutes?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think that's a very good question. I'm getting feedback. I'm not sure if everyone else is on here, but yeah, I think it's obviously we're at the pilot stage at the minute, and I don't think a lot of this is being used widely at all. So I think we're going to have to be wary of the regulator guidance on this matter in terms of the foreseeable future, in terms of whether video recordings of meetings will act as a acceptable form of minutes taking. But I would hope that in the long term it potentially could lead to a reduction in the need for a laborious set of minutes, remove the additional cost that this produces. I think in terms of the question about action-driven logs, I think Dalriada internally, we would produce an action log anyway based on the back of those minutes that we currently produce. So that is something we do. But I think hopefully in the long term, maybe the video recording of the meeting and the decisions taken may well be acceptable. But you obviously the scheme rules needs to be referred back to. It needs to be need to ensure that decisions can be taken by different mediums, and the scheme rules allow for that to happen. I still think there'll always be a need for even the brief minute to be taken on key decisions that have been taken. I think personally, I think there should always be a recording of that. Whether or not a video recording is acceptable is debatable for me. I think key decisions should always be noted down. And the action log will be a key driver going forward. Obviously, if the video recording of a meeting is deemed acceptable and we deem we can use that going forward, then the action logs are going to take an even more prevalent role. Obviously, for the trustees who are not, they don't see a set of minutes, so the action log will potentially become even more of a tool that can be used, and via Teams it will be easily maintained, easily updated, and the trustees and probably advisors will be able to see the progress made. So I probably have waffled my way through that question in a way, but I don't think there's a certainty. We can't say for certain yes that this video recording model will negate the need for minutes, but hopefully it will reduce the need for the laborious minutes that people are currently taking and people are currently producing. So hopefully that answers the question in a roundabout way.
Okay, thanks for that, Liam. Not seeing anything further posted on the Q&A box there, so I think that just leaves me to say thank you to everyone for attending today. We hope to see you at subsequent future influencer webinars. Please do bear in mind that we welcome your suggestions on topics, and we very much welcome any offer to speak at these events. Normally we would not just have speakers from Dalriada, but for circumstances beyond our control, we had to go with Dalriada across the board just on this occasion. That will probably not be the norm for future events. So with one final glance to the chat box and seeing that there's nothing new posted there, we won't detain anyone any further. Hope to see you again. Please keep safe and have a good day. Thank you.